Good evening all, and welcome back to Paranoia Files. Tonight we venture into the darkest corners of Canadian crime with 8 of the most disturbing true stories ever brought to light. These are not sensationalized tales or recycled legends, but verified accounts drawn from real police files, witness testimonies, and the haunting memories of those who survived encounters with pure evil. From the inexplicable vanishing of ordinary people in broad daylight to the calculated brutality of predators hiding in plain sight, each story exposes the unsettling reality that horror does not announce itself with fanfare. It arrives quietly in small towns and busy tourist destinations, in basements and remote cabins, leaving behind only questions that may never be answered. Every detail you will hear tonight has been carefully researched and cross-referenced with official records and first-hand accounts, ensuring that what you are about to experience is as close to the truth as storytelling allows. Names and certain locations have been altered to protect the privacy and dignity of victims and their families, but the essence of each tragedy remains untouched. If you have not yet subscribed to Paranoia Files, I urge you to do so now and activate the notification bell so you never miss an upload when we shine a light on the cases that refuse to be forgotten. Leave a comment below and share which story unsettled you the most, or tell us about your own brushes with the inexplicable. Now let us begin. I was 26 years old when Allison Merrick disappeared. That makes me 32 now, and not a single day has passed when I have not thought about her, about that night, about what I saw or failed to see. People tell me it was not my fault, that there was nothing I could have done differently, but they were not there. They did not work the closing shift at Rosie's Diner on Cumberland Street in Thunder Bay, Ontario. They did not watch her walk out into the darkness at 2:15 in the morning, smiling and waving goodbye like she had done 100 times before. They did not see the truck. I need to tell you about Allison first, because she was not just another missing person whose face ends up on a poster in a police station. She was real. She was kind in a way that felt almost old-fashioned. The kind of person who remembered your birthday and asked about your mother's health and left extra-large tips for the kitchen staff, even though she made barely more than minimum wage herself. She had been working at Rosie's for 3 years when I started in the spring of 2019, and within a week she had become something like a mentor to me, teaching me how to balance trays, how to deal with the late-night drunks without losing your patience, how to smile even when your feet were screaming and your back felt like it might give out. She was 24 years old. She had auburn hair that she always wore in a ponytail during shifts and freckles that spread across her nose and cheeks. She was studying early childhood education part-time at Confederation College and talked endlessly about opening her own daycare someday, a place where kids could feel safe and loved. She lived alone in a small basement apartment on May Street, about a 20-minute walk from the diner, and she had a rescue dog named Benny, a scruffy terrier mix that she adored more than anything in the world. She sent me photos of him constantly, pictures of him sleeping in ridiculous positions or wearing tiny sweaters she had knitted herself. The night Allison disappeared was a Tuesday in late September. The air had started to turn cold, that sharp northern Ontario cold that cuts through your jacket and makes you walk faster. We had worked together that night, the closing shift, which meant we were the only 2 employees left after midnight. It was a slow evening, just a handful of regulars and a couple of truckers passing through. We spent most of the night wiping down tables and restocking napkins and talking about nothing important. She told me about a date she had gone on the previous weekend, some guy she had met through a mutual friend who turned out to be boring and obsessed with his car. I told her about my younger brother who was starting university and how worried I was that he would party too much and flunk out. Normal conversation, easy, comfortable. We closed up just after 2 in the morning. I locked the front door while Allison finished counting the register in the back. When she came out, she was pulling on her coat, a navy blue parka with a fake fur-lined hood. She slung her purse over her shoulder and smiled at me, that same warm, tired smile she always had at the end of a long shift. She said she was exhausted and could not wait to get home and crawl into bed. She said Benny was probably pacing by the door waiting for her. She said she would see me on Thursday for our next shift together. I walked her to the back door, the one that led out into the alley behind the diner. It was something I always did, not because Thunder Bay felt particularly dangerous, but because it was late and dark and it seemed like the decent thing to do. We stood there for a moment, lingering in the doorway, and that was when I saw the truck. It was parked across the street just beyond the alley, idling under a broken street lamp. It was an older model, dark in color, maybe black or dark blue, with a dented front bumper. I remember noticing it because it seemed out of place. There was no reason for anyone to be sitting in a parked truck at 2 in the morning on a quiet side street. The engine was running. I could see the exhaust in the cold air. I almost said something to Allison. I almost told her that the truck looked strange, that maybe I should walk her home or call her a cab. But I did not. I convinced myself I was being paranoid, that I was letting too many true crime podcasts get into my head. Thunder Bay was not a huge city, but it was not tiny either. People parked wherever they wanted. It was probably just someone who had pulled over to check their phone or adjust their GPS. It was nothing. So I said goodnight to Allison and I watched her walk down the alley toward the street. She turned left, heading in the direction of her apartment, her hands stuffed into her coat pockets, her breath visible in the cold air. I waited until she reached the corner and turned out of sight, and then I went back inside. I finished cleaning up, locked the back door, turned off the lights, and left through the front entrance. I got into my car and drove home. I did not think about the truck again that night. Allison did not show up for work on Thursday. I arrived at the diner at 5 in the evening for the dinner shift, and she was not there. That was unusual. Allison was never late, and if she was going to miss a shift, she always called ahead. I asked our manager, Diane, if Allison had called in sick. Diane said no, she had not heard from her. Diane tried calling Allison's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. She left a message asking Allison to call back as soon as possible. By Friday, we were all worried. Diane called Allison's emergency contact, her mother who lived in Fort Frances, a small town about 3 hours west of Thunder Bay. Her mother had not heard from her either. She said Allison usually called her every Sunday, but she had missed the previous week's call, which was unlike her. Her mother said she had, assumed Allison was just busy with school and work, but now she was scared. She said she was getting in her car and driving to Thunder Bay immediately. Diane called the police. 2 officers came to the diner that afternoon and took statements from everyone who had worked with Allison recently. I told them about the closing shift on Tuesday, about walking her to the back door, about watching her walk toward home. I told them about the truck. I described it as best as I could. The dark color, the dented bumper, the fact that it had been idling with no one visible inside. The officers wrote everything down and said they would look into it. Allison's mother arrived later that evening. Her name was Margaret, and she looked exactly like an older version of Allison, the same auburn hair, the same freckles, the same kind eyes that were now red and swollen from crying. She went to Allison's apartment with the police. They found the door unlocked. Inside, everything was as Allison had left it. Her keys were on the kitchen counter. Her purse was on the couch. Her phone was plugged in and charging on her nightstand. Her wallet was there, her identification, her credit cards, everything. Benny was there too, whimpering and hungry, pacing frantically around the small apartment. He had not been fed in 2 days. But Allison was not there. It was as if she had walked into her apartment, set down her things, and then simply vanished. The police launched a search immediately. They went door to door in Allison's neighborhood asking if anyone had seen or heard anything unusual on Tuesday night or early Wednesday morning. No one had. They reviewed security camera footage from businesses along the route Allison would have taken from the diner to her apartment. They found her on several cameras, walking alone, her hands in her pockets, her head down against the cold. She was visible on a camera outside a convenience store on Cumberland Street at 2:21 in the morning. She was visible again on a camera outside a laundromat on May Street at 2:27. And then she was gone. There was a gap in the footage, a 200-meter stretch of May Street between the laundromat and the next camera at a gas station. That stretch of road had no security cameras, no businesses, just a few residential houses set back from the street with dark windows and empty driveways. Allison had walked into that 200-meter blind spot and never walked out the other side. The police organized search parties. Volunteers combed the area, looking in alleys and parks and empty lots. They searched the wooded areas near the Kaministiquia River. They brought in cadaver dogs. They drained a retention pond 2 blocks from Allison's apartment. They found nothing. No body, no clothing, no signs of a struggle. Nothing. 3 weeks later, a jogger found Allison's scarf near the riverbank, about a kilometer downstream from where the initial searches had been concentrated. It was light blue with white stripes, hand-knitted, something her grandmother had made for her years ago. Allison wore it all the time in the fall and winter. The police sent divers into the river. They searched the surrounding woods again. They expanded the search radius. Still, they found nothing. The case went cold. The police had no leads, no suspects, no evidence of foul play beyond the fact that Allison had disappeared without a trace. The truck I had seen was never located. The police reviewed traffic camera footage from around the city that night, looking for dark-colored trucks with dented bumpers, but there were too many possibilities and no way to narrow it down. The officers told me there was nothing more I could have done, that even if I had written down the license plate number, it might not have mattered. But I knew better. I should have walked her home. I should have insisted. I should have trusted my instincts. Margaret stayed in Thunder Bay for 2 months, living in Allison's apartment, taking care of Benny, putting up missing person posters on every street corner and bulletin board in the city. I visited her several times. We would sit together in that small, sad apartment, drinking tea and talking about Allison, about her dreams and her kindness and the unfairness of it all. Margaret told me she could feel that Allison was gone, that a mother knows when her child is no longer in the world. But she also said she needed to know what had happened, that she could not rest until she had answers. I quit Rosie's Diner a month after Allison disappeared. I could not walk through that back door anymore without seeing her, without imagining the truck, without feeling the weight of my own failure. I moved to Winnipeg the following spring, trying to start over, trying to outrun the guilt. But it followed me. It still follows me. I drive past that stretch of May Street every time I visit Thunder Bay. I slow down when I reach the 200-meter gap, the place where the cameras could not see, the place where Allison vanished. I look at the houses, the overgrown yards, the cracked sidewalks. I wonder what happened in those 200 meters. I wonder if someone was waiting in the shadows, if someone pulled her into a vehicle, if she screamed and no one heard. I wonder if the driver of that truck knew her routine, if he had been watching her for weeks, waiting for the right moment. The police still have an open case file. They still receive tips occasionally, anonymous calls that lead nowhere. Margaret still lives in Fort Frances, still hoping for closure that may never come. Benny lives with her now. He is older, slower, but he still waits by the door sometimes as if he is expecting Allison to walk through it. I look for her in every face I pass on the street. I see her in young women with auburn hair, in college students carrying textbooks, in waitresses working late-night shifts. I think about the last time I saw her, standing in that alley, smiling and waving, telling me she would see me on Thursday. I think about the truck, about how close I was to saying something, to doing something, to changing the outcome. Somewhere, someone knows what happened to Allison Merrick. Someone knows what happened in those 200 meters of darkness. Someone knows where she is, whether she is buried in the woods or at the bottom of the river or hidden in a place no one has thought to look. I pray that person speaks up. I pray they find the courage or the conscience to tell the truth. Because Margaret deserves to know. Allison deserves to be found. And I deserve to stop wondering if I could have saved her. You have probably heard about the cabin in Algonquin Park that nobody goes near, the one where hikers report hearing screams in the dead of night, where compasses spin wildly and refuse to point north, where people feel watched even when they are completely alone. You have heard the stories whispered around campfires, shared on internet forums, dismissed by park rangers as urban legend and overactive imagination. I thought it was bullshit too. I thought it was the kind of story people told to make the wilderness seem more exciting, more dangerous, more mysterious than it actually was. I was wrong. My name is Marcus Okafor. I am 29 years old, and I have been backpacking through Ontario's provincial parks since I was a teenager. I grew up in Ottawa, spending my summers at wilderness camps, learning how to read maps and start fires and navigate through dense forest without getting lost. By the time I reached adulthood, I had hiked hundreds of kilometers of backcountry trails, camped in every kind of weather, encountered black bears and moose and timber wolves, and never once felt genuinely afraid. The wilderness was my sanctuary, the place where I felt most at peace, most connected to something larger than myself. In the fall of 2021, I took 2 weeks off work and decided to do a solo trek through Algonquin Park. I had been there many times before, but always on the well-traveled routes, the popular canoe circuits and established campsites. This time, I wanted something different. I wanted isolation. I wanted to disappear into the woods and not see another human being for days at a time. I studied topographical maps and trail reports, plotting a route that would take me deep into the northern interior of the park, far from the highways and visitor centers and crowded portages. It was during this research that I first came across mentions of the cabin. The references were vague and scattered, buried in old forum threads and obscure blog posts. People described it as an abandoned structure somewhere in the backcountry, far off any marked trail, surrounded by dense forest and accessible only to those willing to bushwhack through difficult terrain. Some said it had been built by a trapper decades ago and left to rot after his death. Others claimed it was older than that, a relic from the logging era constructed by men who worked the forests in the early 1900s. A few insisted it had never been officially recorded, that it existed in a kind of bureaucratic blind spot, unacknowledged by park authorities and unmarked on any map. But it was the stories about the cabin itself that caught my attention. Multiple people reported feeling an overwhelming sense of dread when they approached it, a visceral wrongness that made their skin crawl and their hearts race. Some heard footsteps circling the structure at night, heavy boots on dead leaves even though they were alone. Others saw shadows moving past the windows, glimpsed figures standing just beyond the tree line, watching. One person claimed to have spent the night inside and woke up to find fresh scratches on the door, long, deep gouges that had not been there when he went to sleep. Another wrote that his dog refused to go near the cabin, cowering and whimpering and pulling at the leash until they retreated back into the forest. I was fascinated. I told myself I was skeptical, that I was approaching this as a rational person interested in debunking a myth, but the truth was that I wanted the cabin to be real. I wanted to find it. I wanted to spend a night there and prove to myself and everyone else that it was just an old building, nothing more, that the stories were exaggerations born from fear of the dark and too much time alone in the wilderness. I entered Algonquin Park on a gray October morning, the kind of day when the sky hangs low and heavy and the air smells like rain and rotting leaves. I parked at an access point on the northern edge of the park, shouldered my pack and started walking. For the first 2 days, I followed established trails, moving steadily deeper into the backcountry, passing the occasional hiker or canoeist, but mostly traveling alone. The forest was beautiful in the way that autumn forests always are, the maples and birches ablaze with color, the ground carpeted in fallen leaves that crunched beneath my boots. On the 3rd day, I left the trail. I had identified a likely area on my map, a region of dense forest and uneven terrain where the cabin was rumored to exist. I had GPS coordinates copied from one of the forum posts, though the person who posted them admitted they might not be entirely accurate. I did not care. I had time, supplies, and a stubborn determination to find what I was looking for. Bushwhacking through Algonquin is not easy. The forest is thick with undergrowth, tangled with deadfall and thorny shrubs that tear at your clothing and scratch your skin. The ground is uneven, full of hidden dips and rocky outcrops that twist your ankles if you are not careful. I moved slowly, consulting my GPS every few minutes, adjusting my course as I went. Hours passed, my legs ached, my shoulders burned from the weight of my pack. I began to wonder if I was chasing a ghost, if the cabin existed at all, or if it was just a collective hallucination, a story that had taken on a life of its own through repetition and embellishment. And then I saw it. It was late afternoon, the light beginning to fade, when I stumbled into a small clearing and found the cabin waiting for me. It was larger than I had expected, a solid structure built from rough-hewn logs that had weathered to a dark gray. The roof was made of rusted metal sheets, sagging in places but still mostly intact. There were 2 windows on the front wall, both empty of glass, just dark rectangular openings that stared out like hollow eyes. The door hung slightly ajar, one hinge broken, revealing a slice of darkness within. I stood at the edge of the clearing for a long moment, just looking at it. The cabin was real. It was undeniably physically real, and yet something about it felt wrong. I could not articulate what it was, not at first. The structure itself was unremarkable, just an old building slowly being reclaimed by the forest. But there was a quality to the silence around it, a heaviness in the air that made my pulse quicken. The usual sounds of the forest, the rustling of leaves and the calls of birds, seemed muted here, as if the clearing existed in a pocket of stillness separate from the world around it. I forced myself to move forward. I crossed the clearing, my boots loud on the carpet of dead leaves, and approached the door. I pushed it open fully and stepped inside. The interior was dim, lit only by the fading daylight that filtered through the empty windows. There was a single room, maybe 4 meters by 5, with a dirt floor and walls covered in old graffiti and water stains. In one corner stood a rusted metal bed frame, the mattress long since rotted away. In another corner was a makeshift table constructed from planks of wood balanced on stacks of bricks. The air smelled of mold and decay and something else, something faintly metallic that I could not identify. But it was the walls that captured my attention. They were covered in photographs. Dozens of them, maybe more, pinned directly to the logs with rusted nails. They were old, faded by time and moisture, the colors leached away until they were almost sepia-toned. I moved closer, studying them. They showed people, families, groups of men and women and children, all dressed in the fashion of decades past. Some photos appeared to be from the 1970s, others even older. In several of the images, I recognized the cabin itself in the background, suggesting these photos had been taken right here, in this clearing. I found a journal on the table. It was a small notebook with a water-stained cover, the pages brittle and yellowed. I opened it carefully. The handwriting inside was cramped and difficult to read, but I managed to make out some of the entries. They were dated, spanning several months in what appeared to be the mid-1970s. The author, who never identified himself, wrote about living in the cabin, about hunting and trapping, about the isolation and beauty of the wilderness. But as I read further, the tone of the entries changed. The author began writing about the watchers in the trees, about feeling eyes on him at night, about hearing footsteps and voices when no one else was around. He wrote that he had started seeing figures at the edge of the clearing, shadowy forms that vanished when he tried to approach them. He wrote that he was afraid, that something was wrong with this place, that he needed to leave but could not bring himself to abandon the cabin. The final entry was barely legible, the handwriting shaky and erratic. It read, "They are closer now. They want. Inside. I do not know how much longer I can keep them out. If someone finds this, do not stay here after dark. Do not let them see you." I closed the journal, my hands trembling slightly. I told myself it was just the ramblings of someone who had spent too much time alone, whose mind had been warped by isolation and perhaps mental illness. But I could not shake the unease that had settled over me like a heavy blanket. I decided to spend the night. I know how that sounds. I know it was stupid, reckless, the exact opposite of what any rational person would do after reading that journal. But I had come this far. I had found the cabin. I needed to know if the stories were true, if there was any substance to the fear that surrounded this place, or if it was all just superstition and suggestion. I set up my sleeping bag on the bed frame, cleared a space on the table for my stove, and cooked a simple meal as the last of the daylight faded. I ate in silence, watching the darkness gather outside the windows. When night fell, it fell completely. There was no moon, no stars visible through the cloud cover, just an impenetrable blackness that pressed against the cabin from all sides. I lit my headlamp and tried to read, but I could not concentrate. Every few minutes I found myself looking up, staring at the windows, listening. The footsteps started around midnight. I heard them clearly, the unmistakable sound of boots on dead leaves, slow and deliberate, circling the cabin. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. I turned off my headlamp and sat in the darkness, listening. The footsteps continued, moving around the exterior of the cabin in a steady loop, pausing occasionally as if the person was stopping to look through the windows. I wanted to believe it was an animal, a deer or a bear, but the rhythm was wrong. It was bipedal. It was human. I forced myself to move. I crawled to one of the windows and peered out into the darkness. I could see nothing. The blackness was total, impenetrable. But I could still hear the footsteps, closer now, just a few meters from the window. I held my breath, straining to see, and then I saw it. A shadow darker than the surrounding darkness moving past the window. It was the shape of a person, tall and thin, but there were no features, no details, just a silhouette that seemed to absorb what little light existed. I backed away from the window, my mind racing. I told myself to leave, to grab my pack and run, but I was paralyzed by fear and by a perverse curiosity. I wanted to see more. I wanted to understand what I was witnessing. The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound had been. I waited, counting my heartbeats, wondering if it was over. And then I heard the scratching. It started at the door, a slow, deliberate sound like fingernails or claws dragging across the wood. It continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, and then it stopped. I did not sleep that night. I sat with my back against the wall, my knife in my hand, watching the windows and the door, waiting for something to break through. But nothing did. When dawn finally came, gray and cold, I packed my gear with shaking hands and stepped outside. The scratches were there. Fresh gouges in the wood of the door, long and deep, starting at about shoulder height and dragging down to waist level. They had not been there the night before. I was certain of that. I photographed them, though my hands were shaking so badly that the images came out blurred. I left the clearing without looking back. I bushwhacked through the forest, moving as fast as my exhausted body would allow, desperate to put distance between myself and the cabin. When I finally reached the trail, I nearly wept with relief. I hiked out of the park that same day, drove straight home, and spent the next week trying to convince myself that I had imagined it. That fear and isolation had played tricks on my mind. But then I did research. I found police reports from 1976 detailing the disappearance of a family of 4 who had been camping in the northern interior of Algonquin Park. Their names were Gerald and Linda Pritchard and their 2 children, ages 8 and 11. They had checked in at a park access point, told rangers they were planning a week-long backcountry trip, and were never seen again. Their vehicle was found abandoned at the access point 2 weeks later. Search parties combed the area but found no trace of them, no bodies, no gear, nothing. The case was never solved. I returned to the cabin a month later, this time with a police officer I had managed to convince to accompany me. We found it exactly as I had left it. The scratches were still on the door. The photographs were still on the walls. The journal was still on the table. I showed the officer the photos and he recognized one of them. It was the Pritchard family posing in front of the cabin, smiling. The photo had been taken shortly before they disappeared. But there was something else in the photo, something I had not noticed before. In the background, just at the edge of the tree line, was a figure. It was blurred, indistinct, but it was undeniably human-shaped, and it was watching them. The officer took the photo as evidence. He filed a report. But there has been no follow-up, no investigation, no answers. The cabin is still there, hidden deep in the forest, waiting. I will never go back. I do not believe in ghosts. I do not believe in the supernatural. But I believe something evil happened in those woods. I believe the Pritchard family died there or were taken there, and whatever took them might still be there. And I believe that some places are not meant to be found, that there are corners of the wilderness where the rules are different, where the darkness is not just an absence of light, but something living and hungry. If you ever find yourself deep in Algonquin Park and you stumble across a cabin in a clearing that is not marked on any map, do not go inside. Do not stay after dark, walk away, and do not look back. My father was a respected cardiovascular surgeon in Halifax. My mother was his perfect accessory, or so everyone thought. My name is Sienna Tremblay. I am 32 years old now, but when this story begins, I was just a child, oblivious to the monster sleeping down the hall from my bedroom, eating breakfast across from me every morning, driving me to school with hands that had done unspeakable things. I have spent the last 14 years trying to reconcile the father I thought I knew with the man he actually was, and I am not sure I will ever succeed. I need to start at the beginning, even though it hurts to go back there. I was born in Halifax in 1993. My father, Dr. Nathan Tremblay, was 40 years old at the time, already well established in his career, respected by colleagues, admired by patients. He specialized in complex heart surgeries, the kind that required steady hands and ice-cold composure. People trusted him with their lives. He saved dozens of people over the course of his career, maybe hundreds. That is what makes this so difficult to comprehend. How can someone dedicate their professional life to healing while simultaneously destroying lives in secret? My mother's name was Vivian. She was 32 when I was born, 12 years younger than my father, beautiful in a quiet, understated way. She had dark hair and pale skin and delicate features that made her look fragile, breakable. In my earliest memories, she is always smiling, always patient, always there when I needed her. But as I got older, I started noticing things. The way she flinched when my father raised his voice. The bruises on her arms that she explained away as clumsiness. The locked basement door that we were never, under any circumstances, allowed to go near. The nights when my father would disappear for hours, claiming he had been called in for emergency surgery, even though when I got older and checked the hospital records, there were no surgeries scheduled on those nights. We lived in a large house in the south end of Halifax, the kind of neighborhood where everyone kept their lawns immaculate and their secrets buried deep. It was a perfect suburban existence on the surface. My father left for the hospital early every morning, returned home for dinner, spent his evenings reading medical journals or watching documentaries. My mother took care of the house, volunteered at my school, attended church every Sunday. I had piano lessons and ballet classes and birthday parties with elaborate cakes. To anyone looking in from the outside, we were the ideal family. But there were cracks in the facade if you knew where to look. My mother's nervousness, the way she jumped at sudden noises, the fact that she had no friends, no family nearby, no life outside of our home, and my father's expectations. The locked basement that my father claimed was his workshop, where he went to relax and work on personal projects, but from which strange sounds sometimes emerged late at night. Scraping, muffled thuds. Once when I was 10 years old, I thought I heard sobbing coming from behind that door, but when I mentioned it to my mother, she went pale and told me I had been dreaming. The year I turned 14 was the year everything changed. It was 2007, a humid summer in Halifax, the kind where the heat settles over the city like a wet blanket and refuses to lift. My father had been in an unusually good mood for weeks, whistling while he made coffee, complimenting my mother on dinner, even taking us out for ice cream one evening. I remember thinking that maybe things were getting better, that maybe the tension I had always felt in our house was finally easing. And then my mother disappeared. It happened on a Tuesday in late July. I woke up that morning and she was not in the kitchen making breakfast like she always was. I called for her. No answer. I checked her bedroom. The bed was made, her clothes were in the closet, but she was not there. I found my father in his study, already dressed for work, reading the newspaper as if nothing was wrong. I asked him where Mom was. He looked up at me with an expression I could not read and said she had left. Just like that, she had left us. She had been unhappy for a long time, he explained, and she had decided she wanted a different life. She had packed a bag in the middle of the night and walked out without saying goodbye. I did not believe him. Not at first. My mother would never have left without telling me, without hugging me, without at least leaving a note. But my father was calm, convincing, almost kind in the way he explained it. He said she had been seeing another man, that she had been planning this for months, that she had made her choice and we needed to respect it. He said she would probably contact me when she was ready, when she had settled into her new life, but that I should not hold my breath. He said some people were just selfish like that. The police came to our house 2 days later. A neighbor had reported seeing my mother loading items into her car late at night and had thought it seemed suspicious. The officers asked my father questions. He answered calmly, patiently, with the same story he had told me. Yes, his wife had left him. No, he did not know where she had gone. No, there had not been any violence or threats. She had simply decided to leave, and he was as shocked and hurt as anyone. The officers looked around the house, asked me a few questions, and then left. They filed a missing persons report, but there was no evidence of foul play, no reason to suspect anything other than what my father had told them. A woman had left her husband. It happened every day. I tried to find her, I called her cell phone over and over, but it went straight to voicemail. I searched her room for clues, for anything that might tell me where she had gone, but everything was exactly as she had left it. Her jewelry was still in her jewelry box. Her favorite books were still on her nightstand. Even her wedding ring was still in the dish on the bathroom counter. What kind of woman leaves her entire life behind like that? The months that followed were strange and hollow. My father and I settled into a new routine. He hired a housekeeper to cook and clean. He made sure I got to school on time, that I did my homework, that I ate properly. He was attentive in a way he had never been before, almost as if he was trying to make up for my mother's absence. But there was something performative about it, something that felt rehearsed. And he never talked about her. If I mentioned my mother, he would change the subject or leave the room. It was as if she had been erased, as if she had never existed at all. I went away to university when I turned 18. I studied psychology at Dalhousie University, just a few kilometers from the house I grew up in, but I rarely went home. I saw my father on holidays, exchanged polite emails, maintained the appearance of a relationship, but there was a distance between us that neither of us tried to bridge. He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in 2016. It was aggressive, inoperable. He declined chemotherapy, said he had lived a full life and was ready to face whatever came next. He died in 2018 at home, with a hospice nurse and me by his side. His final words to me were that he loved me and that he was proud of the woman I had become. I told him I loved him too, even though I was not sure it was true. After his death, I inherited the house. I had no intention of keeping it, no desire to live in the place where I had spent so much of my childhood feeling uneasy and afraid. I hired an estate sale company to come in and appraise everything, to prepare the house for sale. But before they arrived, I decided to go through it myself one last time, to see if there was anything I wanted to keep, any memento or photograph that might bring me comfort. I found the hidden compartment in the basement on a cold afternoon in November. I had finally unlocked the door to my father's workshop, something I had avoided during the entire process of clearing out the house. The room was exactly as I remembered it from the few times I had glimpsed inside as a child. Tools hanging on pegboards, a workbench covered in sawdust, shelves lined with jars of nails and screws. It looked ordinary, unremarkable, the kind of space any hobbyist might have. But when I moved a heavy metal shelving unit to make room for the estate sale team, I noticed something. The wall behind it was not flush. There was a seam, barely visible, running vertically along the concrete. I ran my fingers along it and felt it give slightly. I pushed and a section of the wall swung inward on hidden hinges, revealing a small room I had not known existed. The smell hit me first. Mildew and something chemical, sharp and acrid. I turned on my phone's flashlight and stepped inside. The room was no more than 2 meters by 3, with bare concrete walls and a dirt floor. There was a metal folding table against one wall, and on it were stacks of photographs. I picked one up, my hands shaking, and immediately wished I had not. The photographs showed women, dozens of them. They were bound, gagged, their faces contorted in terror and pain. Some of the images were too graphic, too horrible to describe in detail. I dropped the photo and backed away, my stomach churning, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. But I forced myself to look again. I forced myself to understand. There were journals as well, ledgers written in my father's precise handwriting, documenting dates and details with the same clinical detachment he would have used in surgical reports. He had been abducting women for years, possibly decades. He had brought them here, to this hidden room beneath our house, and he had tortured them. He had used his medical knowledge to keep them alive longer. to inflict maximum suffering without allowing them to die too quickly. And when he was finished, he had disposed of their bodies in ways that ensured they would never be found. I recognized some of the women from the photographs. They were faces I had seen on missing persons posters over the years. Women who had vanished from Halifax and the surrounding areas, cases that had gone cold, families that had never received closure. There were at least 8 women documented in the journals, possibly more. And then I found the entry about my mother. It was dated July 24th, 2007, 2 days after she had disappeared. The entry was short, matter of fact. It read, "Vivian discovered the room tonight. She threatened to go to the police. I could not allow that. She is buried in the northeast corner of the property, 3 meters deep. It is unfortunate but necessary. No one will find her." I sat on the basement floor and cried until I could not breathe. My mother had not left us. She had not abandoned me. She had discovered the truth about my father, and he had killed her for it. She had died trying to protect other women, trying to stop him, and I had spent 11 years believing she had chosen to leave me behind. I called the police. I showed them everything. The hidden room, the photographs, the journals, the burial site. They brought in forensic teams, cadaver dogs, ground-penetrating radar. They excavated the northeast corner of the property and found my mother's remains exactly where my father had said they would be. She had been wrapped in plastic, buried deep, hidden beneath the garden she had once tended with such care. The investigation expanded. Using the information in my father's journals, police were able to identify 3 other burial sites on the property and in nearby wooded areas he had access to. They found 3 more sets of remains. 4 women out of at least 8. The others are still missing, their families still waiting for answers that may never come. The media coverage was relentless. Respected surgeon revealed as serial killer, doctor of death. The headlines were sensational, horrifying, and not entirely inaccurate. My father's colleagues expressed shock and disbelief. His former patients struggled to reconcile the man who had saved their lives with the monster who had taken so many others. I stopped reading the articles, stopped watching the news. I could not bear to see his face, to hear people speculate about his motives and his methods. I sold the house. I moved to Toronto, as far from Halifax as I could get while still remaining in the same country. I changed my name legally, took my mother's maiden name, tried to build a life separate from the nightmare I had inherited. But it follows me. It will always follow me. I spent the first 18 years of my life living with a serial killer, sleeping under the same roof as a man who tortured and murdered women in the basement while I did my homework upstairs. I sat across from him at the dinner table. I hugged him goodnight. I called him Dad. Therapy helps, but only to a point. I have been diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress disorder. I have nightmares where I am back in that basement, where I open the hidden door and find my mother alive, begging me to save her, asking me why I never came looking. I wake up sobbing, gasping for air, unable to shake the feeling that I should have known, that I should have seen the signs, that I could have stopped him if I had only been more observant, more suspicious, more willing to believe that evil could exist in such a mundane and familiar form. The families of the other victims have reached out to me. Some are angry, demanding to know if I ever suspected, if I ever saw anything that could have helped their daughters, their sisters, their mothers. Others are kinder, recognizing that I am a victim too, that I lost my mother and my sense of safety and my ability to trust my own perceptions. I try to help when I can. I have testified in court during the civil suits brought against my father's estate. I have shared everything I know, everything I remember, hoping it might bring some small measure of closure. But there are still 5 women who have not been found. 5 families who do not know where their loved ones are buried, who cannot lay them to rest, who cannot begin to heal. And I carry that weight with me every day. I know where my father disposed of some of his victims, but not all. I know he kept detailed records, but the journals only go back so far. There may be others from earlier in his life, women who disappeared before he started documenting his crimes, cases that will never be connected to him. I am 32 years old. I spent my whole childhood living with a monster, and I never knew until it was too late to save anyone. I think about my mother every day, about the courage it must have taken for her to confront him, about the fear she must have felt in her final moments. I think about the other women, about their terror and their pain and their loneliness as they died in that dark room beneath our house. And I think about the 5 who are still out there, still waiting to be found, still waiting for someone to bring them home. The detective asked me when I first realized it was a cult. I told her I still do not think it started that way. I think it started as something genuine, something hopeful, and then it twisted into something else entirely. But maybe I am wrong. Maybe it was rotten from the beginning and I was just too young and too desperate to see it. My name is Dakota Whitmore. I am 26 years old. I grew up in a town of 400 people in rural Saskatchewan, a place so small it does not appear on most maps, where everyone knows everyone and secrets are impossible to keep, except for the secret that killed 23 people, including my parents. That secret stayed hidden until it was too late. The man who called himself Elijah Morse arrived in our town in the spring of 2015. I was 16 years old at the time, restless and angry in the way that teenagers in isolated places often are. There was nothing to do, nowhere to go, no future that did not involve staying exactly where you were and repeating the patterns of the generation before you. My parents were farmers. Their parents had been farmers. I was expected to marry someone from our town, work the land, have children, and die without ever seeing anything beyond the wheat fields and the endless sky. Morse was different from anyone we had ever encountered. He was in his early 40s, tall and lean, with silver hair and eyes that seemed to see straight through you. He spoke with confidence and compassion in equal measure, and when he smiled, you felt like you were the only person in the world who mattered. He rented the old community hall on Main Street and started holding services every Sunday morning. He called it the Ascension Project, and he said it was about spiritual awakening, about finding purpose and connection, about transcending the limitations of ordinary existence. My mother was the first in our family to attend. She had been depressed for years, isolated on our farm, exhausted from work and loneliness. She came home from that first service glowing, energized in a way I had not seen in a long time. She said Morse had spoken directly to her heart, that he understood her pain, that he had shown her a path forward. My father was skeptical at first, but he went the following week to support her. And then he went again. And again. Within a month, my entire family was attending services every Sunday, and we were not alone. Half the town had joined. The early days were intoxicating. Morse preached about community, about lifting each other up, about the power of collective faith. He held potlucks and study groups and meditation sessions. He organized work parties where members helped repair each other's homes and barns. He started a food bank and a clothing exchange. People who had been isolated and struggling suddenly felt like they belonged to something larger than themselves. It felt good. It felt real. I was swept up in it just like everyone else. But then, things began to change, subtle at first. Morse started holding private meetings with select members, people he said were ready for the next level of understanding. My parents were invited to these meetings. They would leave the house after dinner and not return until after midnight, their faces serious, their lips sealed about what had been discussed. When I asked what happened during these sessions, my mother told me it was sacred knowledge. that I would understand when I was ready, that I needed to trust the process. Morse introduced what he called purification rituals. Members were required to fast for days at a time, to meditate in complete darkness, to confess their sins and failures in front of the congregation. People who resisted or questioned were pulled aside and counseled, told they were blocking their own spiritual growth. That doubt was the enemy of enlightenment. The tone of the services changed. Where there had once been joy and warmth, there was now intensity and fear. Morse began speaking about the corruption of the outside world, about the need to separate ourselves from those who did not understand, about the coming collapse of society and the importance of being prepared. In 2016, Morse announced that the Ascension Project needed a permanent home, a place where members could live and work together without the distractions and temptations of the outside world. He had found land, he said, 20 kilometers outside of town, a former ranch with barns and outbuildings that could be converted into living quarters. He asked members to contribute financially, to sell their homes and possessions, to invest in the future of the community. My parents did not hesitate. They sold our farm, the land that had been in our family for 3 generations, and handed the money over to Morse. Dozens of other families did the same. By the summer of 2017, the compound was complete. 53 people moved in, including my family. I was 18 by then, legally an adult, but I had no say in the decision. My parents told me this was our new home, our new life, and I was expected to embrace it. The compound was surrounded by a high wooden fence. There was a main building where we held services and ate meals together, and smaller bunkhouses where families slept in cramped quarters. We grew our own food, raised chickens and goats, and were forbidden from leaving the property without Morse's permission. Contact with the outside world was severed. Morse said it was necessary, that we needed to focus entirely on our spiritual development without interference. Cell phones were confiscated, internet access was prohibited, letters were monitored. When family members from outside tried to visit, they were turned away at the gate. Morse said they were agents of darkness, that they would try to poison our minds and pull us back into the corrupted world we had left behind. I watched people change. My mother, who had once been thoughtful and gentle, became rigid and fearful. She stopped questioning anything Morse said. She reported other members who expressed doubt or broke rules. My father, who had been strong and independent, became submissive and childlike, looking to Morse for guidance on every decision. And I watched as people who tried to leave were brought back and subjected to what Morse called cleansing ceremonies. They were locked in small rooms, deprived of food and sleep, bombarded with prayers and lectures until they confessed their sins and pledged renewed loyalty. 3 members tried to escape in the fall of 2017. Their names were Thomas Bergeron, Lily Cross, and Joel McKinnon. They made it 5 kilometers into the woods before Morse and several of his most devoted followers tracked them down and brought them back. 2 days later, all 3 were found dead in the woods near the compound. The official story was suicide. They had been so consumed by guilt and shame over their betrayal that they had taken their own lives. The police came to investigate. They interviewed members. Everyone, including me, told them the same story. It was suicide. We were devastated. It was a tragedy. The police left. The case was closed. But I knew better. I had seen the bruises on Lily's neck before she was taken away for the cleansing ceremony. I had heard Thomas screaming in the night. I knew they had been murdered, but I was too terrified to say anything. Morse had made it clear what happened to people who betrayed the Ascension Project. By 2018, the atmosphere at the compound had become unbearable. Morse was erratic, paranoid, claiming to receive visions from a higher power. He said the end of the world was coming, that society was on the verge of collapse, that only those who had achieved true spiritual purity would survive. He began dividing members into tiers based on their level of devotion. Those at the highest tier were given privileges and special teachings. Those at the lowest were humiliated and punished, forced to perform menial labor and live on reduced rations. In August of that year, Morse called an emergency gathering. He said he had received a vision, a message from the divine. The time had come for the final ascension. We had completed our spiritual preparation, and now we were ready to shed our earthly vessels and transcend to a higher plane of existence. He said it would happen in 3 days, that we needed to prepare ourselves through fasting and prayer, that we should say goodbye to our physical forms and embrace the eternal life that awaited us. Some members were ecstatic. They believed him completely. They saw this as the culmination of everything they had worked for. Others were confused, uncertain, but too afraid to voice their doubts, and a few of us, including me, realized what he was actually saying. He was planning a mass suicide. He was going to convince everyone to kill themselves, and he was going to call it Ascension. I knew I had to get out. I found 4 other members who were equally terrified, people who had been looking for a way to escape but did not know how. We made a plan. On the night before the Ascension was scheduled to take place, while everyone was gathered in the main building for a final prayer service, the 5 of us slipped away. We cut a hole in the fence at the back of the compound and ran. We ran through the dark woods, stumbling over roots and rocks, convinced at any moment that we would hear footsteps behind us, that Morse would find us and drag us back. We reached the highway just after midnight. A truck driver saw us, stopped, and let us use his phone. We called the RCMP and told them everything, that there was a mass suicide planned at the Ascension Project compound, that people were going to die, that they needed to send help immediately. The officer on the line said they would dispatch units right away, but it was a remote location and it would take time. We waited on the side of the highway, shivering in the cold, praying that we had not been too late. The police arrived an hour later. We led them to the compound. When they broke through the gate and entered the main building, they found 23 people dead. They had consumed a mixture of sedatives and poison that Morse had prepared, calling it sacred sacrament. My parents were among them. They were lying side by side, holding hands, peaceful expressions on their faces as if they were simply sleeping. But Morse was not dead. He was found alive in his private quarters, unharmed, with no trace of the poison in his system. He claimed that the divine had spared him, that he had been chosen to remain behind and bear witness to the ascension of his followers. He was arrested and charged with 23 counts of murder. During the trial, he showed no remorse. He testified that his followers had chosen their path willingly, that he had simply guided them toward their destiny, that he was a servant of a higher power and could not be judged by earthly laws. He was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He is still there, as far as I know, still claiming divine protection, still insisting that he did nothing wrong. And I am still here, trying to make sense of what happened, trying to understand how my parents, intelligent and kind people, could have been manipulated into drinking poison because a charismatic man told them it would lead to salvation. I live with survivor's guilt every single day. I wonder if I could have done something sooner, if I could have convinced my parents to leave, if I could have exposed Morse before it went so far. But I was just a kid. I was scared and confused and trapped. And even now, 8 years later, I still hear their voices in my head. I hear them praying, singing, believing with absolute certainty that they were doing the right thing. They died for a lie. They died because they trusted someone who exploited their faith and their desperation. And the man who killed them gets 3 meals a day in a cell and will never face the true consequences of what he has done. Lake Louise is one of the most photographed places in Canada. turquoise water framed by towering mountain peaks, pristine wilderness stretching in every direction, a landscape so beautiful it barely seems real. Tourists come from around the world to stand on its shores and capture the perfect image, to say they have been there, to witness nature at its most breathtaking. It is also where my best friend vanished in front of 30 witnesses in broad daylight, and no one can explain how. My name is Jenna Kowalski. I am 28 years old. I live in Vancouver and I have not returned to Lake Louise since July 26, 2020. I do not think I ever will. Paige Devereaux was 27 when she disappeared. We had been best friends since high school, one of those friendships that feels effortless and essential, the kind where you do not need to explain yourself because the other person already understands. We grew up together in East Vancouver, navigated teenage drama together, went to different universities but stayed close, supported each other through breakups and job losses and family crises. Paige was the kind of person who made everyone around her feel lighter, who laughed easily and loved fiercely and believed the world was fundamentally good despite all evidence to the contrary. In July of 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic when travel restrictions had started to ease slightly, Paige suggested a road trip. She said we both needed to get out of the city, to breathe fresh air and remember what life felt like outside of lockdown and isolation. I hesitated at first. The world still felt dangerous, uncertain, but Paige was persuasive. She said we would be careful, that we would stay outdoors, that we deserved this after months of being trapped in our apartments. So I agreed. We loaded up her car with camping gear and drove east toward the Rockies. Lake Louise was our third stop. We had spent 2 days hiking in Jasper National Park, sleeping in the car at designated campgrounds, cooking meals on a portable stove, feeling like explorers even though we were following well-marked trails and surrounded by other tourists doing exactly the same thing. The weather was perfect, warm and clear. The kind of summer days that make you forget winter exists. Paige was happy. I remember that so clearly. She kept taking photos of everything, of the mountains and the trees and me making ridiculous faces, saying she wanted to remember this trip forever, that this was exactly what she needed. We arrived at Lake Louise early on a Sunday morning. Even at that hour, the parking lot was filling up quickly. Families unloading strollers and hiking backpacks. Couples holding hands and consulting trail maps. The lake itself was stunning in a way that photographs cannot quite capture. The water was that impossible shade of turquoise created by glacial sediment, reflecting the mountains and the sky with mirror-like precision. The air smelled clean and cold despite the summer heat, carrying the faint mineral scent of snow melt. Paige wanted to wade into the water. She said she had read that the lake was freezing even in summer, fed by glaciers high in the mountains, and she wanted to experience it for herself. I told her she was insane, that the water would be unbearable, but she was already pulling off her hiking boots and rolling up her pants. I followed her down to the shore, my camera in hand, laughing at her determination to do something completely unnecessary just because she could. The shoreline was crowded that day. Families were spread out along the rocky beach, children throwing stones into the water, parents taking photos, a group of teenagers sitting in a circle eating sandwiches. There were easily 30 people within a 50-meter radius of where we stood. Paige stepped into the water and immediately yelped, dancing backward and laughing. She said it felt like her feet were being stabbed by 1,000 tiny knives. I told her I had warned her. She said she was going to try again, that she would get used to it. She waded in a second time, more slowly, wincing with each step. The water was shallow near the shore, maybe knee-deep at most, crystal clear so you could see every stone on the bottom. I stood about 5 meters back on dry land, taking photos of her. She turned toward me, grinning, her arms spread wide, and told me to get a good shot because this was going to be her new profile picture. I looked down at my phone to check the framing, to make sure the mountains were visible in the background. I was looking away for maybe 10 seconds, maybe less. When I looked up, she was gone. Just gone. The water where she had been standing was empty, undisturbed, as if she had never been there at all. I stared at the spot, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. I called her name, no response. I looked left and right along the shore, thinking maybe she had climbed out while I was distracted, but she was not there. I looked farther out into the lake, thinking maybe she had swum away as a joke, but the water was still unbroken. There were no ripples, no splashes, no sign of movement. I started screaming. I dropped my phone and ran into the water, yelling for Paige, searching frantically, expecting to see her surface at any moment, laughing at the prank she had pulled. But she did not surface. I waded deeper, the cold shocking my system, and people around me started to notice. A man grabbed my arm and asked what was wrong. I told him my friend was in the water, that she had been right there and now she was gone. He looked at me like I was crazy. He said he had been watching his kids play in this exact spot and he had not seen anyone disappear. Within minutes, a crowd had formed. People were asking questions, trying to understand what had happened. Some waded into the water to help search. Others called emergency services. Park rangers arrived within 15 minutes, followed shortly by RCMP officers. They organized an immediate search. Divers were brought in from Banff. Helicopters circled overhead. Boats scanned the surface of the lake. The entire shoreline was cordoned off as a search area. I was questioned extensively. I told them everything I could remember. Paige had been standing in knee-deep water. She had been smiling, posing for a photo. I looked down at my phone, looked back up, and she was gone. The officers asked if she was a strong swimmer. I said yes, but that the water was so shallow she would not have needed to swim. They asked if she had been drinking or using drugs. I said no, absolutely not. They asked if she seemed depressed or suicidal. I said no, she had been happy, excited, looking forward to the rest of our trip. Witnesses corroborated parts of my story. Multiple people confirmed they had seen Paige in the water. One woman said she remembered noticing Paige because she was laughing and seemed to be enjoying herself despite the cold. A man said he had glanced over just before she disappeared and saw her standing there, arms outstretched. But no one saw what happened next. No one saw her go under. No one saw her swim away. No one saw anything. She was there, and then she was not. The search continued for 5 days. Divers explored every inch of the lake near the shore, then expanded their search to deeper areas. Lake Louise is not a particularly deep lake by mountain standards, averaging around 70 meters at its deepest point, but the cold glacial water makes diving difficult and dangerous. The visibility is excellent, which should have made finding a body easier, but there was nothing to find. No body, no clothing, no evidence that Paige had ever been there except for her boots and socks sitting on the shore where she had left them. I was interviewed by police psychologists. They wanted to make sure I was mentally stable, that I had not fabricated the story or imagined the entire event. I showed them the photos on my phone. There were dozens of pictures of Paige from earlier that morning, images of her hiking, laughing, standing by the lake. The final photo showed her in the water, arms outstretched, mountains in the background. The timestamp was 11:23 a.m. The next photo on my phone was blurred and dark, taken accidentally when I dropped the phone while running into the water. That photo was timestamped 11:23 a.m. as well. Less than a minute had passed between the two images. The case was featured on local and national news. Mysterious disappearance at Lake Louise. Woman vanishes without a trace. Experts weighed in with theories. Some suggested she had been pulled under by an unexpected current, though lake specialists confirmed there are no significant currents in Lake Louise. Others proposed she had suffered a medical emergency, a sudden seizure or heart attack that caused her to collapse beneath the surface, but that would not explain the complete absence of a body. The water in Lake Louise is cold enough to preserve remains indefinitely. If Paige had drowned, her body should have been found. More outlandish theories circulated online. Some claimed the lake was cursed, that it had swallowed people before and would do so again. Others suggested government cover-ups, secret military experiments, interdimensional portals. I ignored all of it. I did not care about theories or speculation. I just wanted my friend back. Paige's parents arrived from Vancouver 2 days into the search. Watching them stand on that shore, staring at the water that had taken their daughter, was one of the most painful experiences of my life. They asked me to explain what happened, and I told them the same thing I had told everyone else. I looked away for 10 seconds and she was gone. Her mother cried. Her father just stood there, silent, his face empty. They stayed for 2 weeks, waiting for news that never came. Eventually, they returned to Vancouver, leaving behind missing person posters and a reward for information that has never been claimed. The official investigation remains open, but it has been 5 years and there have been no developments. No leads, no sightings, no discoveries. Paige Devereaux is classified as a missing person, presumed dead, though her body has never been recovered. The case is filed under unexplained disappearance, a category reserved for situations that defy logical explanation. I have gone over that day thousands of times in my mind. I have studied the photos, replayed every moment, searched for details I might have missed. I have read every article, watched every news segment, listened to every theory. None of it brings me closer to understanding what happened. People do not vanish in knee-deep water in broad daylight with witnesses everywhere. It is physically impossible. And yet it happened. I still have Paige's boots. The police returned them to me after the search ended. They are sitting in a box in my closet along with photos from our trip and the t-shirt she lent me the night before she disappeared. I cannot bring myself to throw them away, but I also cannot look at them without feeling the weight of that day crushing down on me. I think about the last words she said to me. Get a good shot. This is going to be my new profile picture. I think about how happy she looked, how alive. I think about the fact that I was holding a camera and looking away at the exact moment she needed me most. I tell myself there is nothing I could have done, that even if I had been watching her the entire time, I would not have been able to stop whatever happened. But the guilt remains. Paige's parents have never blamed me. They have told me repeatedly that it was not my fault, that I did everything I could, that they are grateful I was with her so she was not alone. But I blame myself. I looked away. I will spend the rest of my life wondering what I would have seen if I had kept my eyes on her for those 10 seconds. Would I have seen her slip beneath the water? Would I have seen something reach up and pull her down? Would I have seen her simply cease to exist, blinking out of reality like she had never been there at all? I do not know. I will never know. And that uncertainty is its own kind of torture, a question without an answer, a loss without closure, a grief that has no resolution because the person I am grieving simply disappeared into nothing. I am a paramedic in Yellowknife, Northwest Territories. I have been doing this job for 19 years. I have seen people die from exposure, from accidents, from violence and disease, and every other way a human body can fail. I have pulled corpses from frozen lakes and car wrecks and house fires. I thought I had seen everything. I was wrong. In February of 2023, my partner and I received a call that will haunt me until the day I die. My name is Tyler Beaumont. I am 41 years old, and I found 12 people frozen to death in a remote cabin, all kneeling, all facing north, all with their hands clasped in prayer. The call came in just after 7 in the morning on a Saturday. Dispatch said someone had phoned about a situation at a cabin approximately 40 kilometers northwest of Yellowknife, near the Ingram Trail. The caller had not provided details, had not left a name, had hung up before dispatch could ask questions. The only information we had was GPS coordinates. It was unusual, suspicious even, but we were obligated to respond. My partner, a younger guy named Chris, and I loaded into the ambulance and started driving. The temperature that morning was minus 38 degrees Celsius. Clear skies, no wind, the kind of cold that makes the air feel solid. We reached the coordinates after nearly an hour of driving, the last 15 minutes on an unmarked access road that was barely more than tire tracks in the snow. The cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by black spruce trees, isolated and unremarkable. It was a simple structure, maybe 6 meters by 8, with a metal stovepipe jutting from the roof and frosted windows that revealed nothing of the interior. There were no vehicles nearby, no footprints in the fresh snow, no signs of life. Chris and I approached cautiously. We knocked on the door. No response. I called out, identifying ourselves as paramedics, asking if anyone needed help. Silence. I tried the door handle. It was unlocked. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, and what I saw made me stop breathing. There were 12 people inside. All of them were dead. They were kneeling in a circle in the center of the single room, facing outward like the spokes of a wheel, all oriented toward magnetic north. Their hands were clasped in front of them, heads bowed as if they were praying. They were dressed in light clothing, sweaters and jeans, no coats or gloves or hats. Their skin was pale gray, their lips blue, their eyes open and glazed with frost. They had frozen to death. I have seen frozen bodies before, hypothermia victims, people who got lost in the wilderness or passed out drunk in the snow. But this was different. These people had not frozen accidentally. They had done this deliberately. They had positioned themselves carefully, chosen this specific posture, and then waited to die. Chris called for backup immediately. We secured the scene, checked for survivors even though it was obvious there were none, and waited for the RCMP to arrive. While we waited, I looked around the cabin. There was a wood stove in the corner, cold and empty. There were supplies stacked against the walls, food and water and firewood, enough to keep a dozen people alive for weeks. But none of it had been used. The people in the circle had chosen to freeze rather than stay warm. It made no sense. The RCMP arrived within the hour, followed by a forensic team from Yellowknife. The bodies were photographed, documented, and eventually removed for autopsy. The cabin was searched. What they found explained some of what had happened, but not the horror of it. The 12 people were members of a group called Arctic Enlightenment. It was a small spiritual organization led by a woman named Noelle Grimshaw, 46 years old, originally from Edmonton. Grimshaw had been running workshops and retreats for the past 5 years, claiming to teach a path to spiritual transcendence through meditation, fasting, and exposure to extreme cold. She said that the human body was a prison, that true enlightenment came from shedding physical attachment, that the Arctic environment was sacred and could facilitate direct communion with the divine. Most of her followers were people who felt lost, isolated, searching for meaning. She targeted them carefully, offering community and purpose and a sense of belonging. She held small gatherings in Yellowknife, led meditation sessions, organized weekend retreats. On the surface, it seemed harmless. But underneath, she was building something darker. In January of 2023, Grimshaw had convinced 10 of her most devoted followers to participate in what she called a transcendence ritual. She told them that if they could willingly release their attachment to warmth, to survival, to the physical body itself, they would achieve spiritual liberation. She said they would ascend to a higher plane of existence. that their bodies would remain behind but their consciousness would be freed. She said it would be peaceful, beautiful, transformative. She said she would guide them through it and ascend alongside them. The group gathered at the cabin in early February. They brought supplies but were instructed not to use them. Grimshaw led them in days of fasting and meditation, preparing them mentally and spiritually for what was to come. And then, on the night of February 10th, she told them it was time. They removed their coats. They arranged themselves in the circle. They knelt facing north, the direction Grimshaw claimed was the gateway to the divine. They clasped their hands and began to pray. And they froze to death. All of them. The process would have taken hours. First, they would have felt intense cold, then numbness, then confusion as hypothermia set in. Their core temperatures would have dropped. Their organs would have begun to fail. Their hearts would have slowed and eventually stopped. It would not have been peaceful. It would have been agony. But 3 of the bodies showed signs of struggle, restraint marks on their wrists and ankles, defensive wounds on their hands, bruising on their faces. These 3 had not gone willingly. They had realized what was happening, had tried to resist, had fought to save themselves. And someone had tied them down and forced them to stay in position until the cold killed them. Grimshaw had not been interested in allowing doubt. If you questioned the ritual, if you tried to leave, you were restrained and left to die anyway. The autopsies confirmed it. 9 of the 12 had died from hypothermia consistent with voluntary exposure. 3 had died from hypothermia while physically restrained. It was not a mass suicide. It was murder. Grimshaw had convinced 10 people to kill themselves, and when 3 of them changed their minds, she made sure they died anyway. But Grimshaw herself was not among the dead. The investigation revealed that in the months leading up to the ritual, she had convinced her followers to liquidate their assets, to sell their homes and vehicles and possessions, and donate the money to Arctic Enlightenment. Over $800,000 had been transferred into accounts controlled by Grimshaw. She had taken the money and disappeared. The RCMP launched a nationwide manhunt. Grimshaw's photo was circulated. Her financial records were tracked. She was last seen in Yellowknife on February 8th, 2 days before the ritual. She had withdrawn cash from multiple ATMs, purchased a bus ticket to Edmonton under a false name, and vanished. Despite extensive efforts, she has not been found. As of today, November 2025, Noelle Grimshaw remains at large. The theory is that she fled south, possibly into the United States, possibly farther. She may have changed her appearance, assumed a new identity. She may be starting over somewhere, gathering new followers, building a new version of Arctic Enlightenment. The RCMP believes she will do this again, that she is a predator who preys on vulnerable people, that she will continue until she is caught. I think about those 12 people constantly. I think about the 9 who believed so completely in Grimshaw's lies that they knelt in the freezing cold and waited to die. I think about the terror they must have felt as their bodies shut down, the moment they realized transcendence was not coming, that they had been deceived. And I think about the 3 who fought, who understood too late what was happening, who were tied down and forced to freeze while Grimshaw watched and did nothing. I remember their faces, the expressions frozen on them. Some looked peaceful, resigned. Others looked terrified, anguished. One woman, later identified as 32-year-old Maria Huang from Vancouver, had tears frozen on her cheeks. She had been one of the ones who resisted. Her wrists had deep lacerations from where she had struggled against the restraints. She had fought to survive, and she had died anyway. The families of the victims have been devastated. Some have filed lawsuits, though there is no one to sue. Grimshaw is gone, her organization dissolved, the money untraceable. Others have tried to make sense of why their loved ones would follow someone so dangerous, would believe in something so clearly destructive. There are no good answers. Cult psychology is complex. Grimshaw was skilled at manipulation, at identifying people who were lonely and desperate and offering them exactly what they needed until it was too late to escape. I still respond to emergency calls. I still do my job. But something changed after that day. I see those faces every time I close my eyes. I see them kneeling in that circle, hands clasped, frozen in prayer. 10 people who believed so hard they froze themselves to death. 3 who fought to live but were murdered for doubting. And 1 woman who orchestrated it all, took their money and disappeared into the vastness of Canada with no consequences. If you are reading this, if you encounter a charismatic person offering spiritual enlightenment through extreme practices, if you are asked to give up your possessions and isolate yourself from loved ones, please recognize the warning signs. Cults do not announce themselves. They present as communities, as families, as paths to meaning. And by the time you realize what they actually are, it may be too late to leave. Noelle Grimshaw is still out there. She is still dangerous. And she will do this again if given the chance. If you have any information about her whereabouts, contact the RCMP immediately. Do not approach her. Do not believe anything she tells you. She is responsible for 12 deaths and she feels no remorse. I know this because when investigators searched the cabin, they found a journal she had left behind. The final entry, dated February 9th, the night before the ritual, read, "Tomorrow they will be free. I have given them the greatest gift imaginable, and now I am free as well." She saw their deaths as a gift. She saw herself as a liberator. And somewhere right now she is looking for more people to liberate in the same way. I hope she is found before that happens. I hope no one else has to die kneeling in the cold, praying to a God that does not answer, deceived by a woman who values money more than human life. Entry 1, March 3rd, 2021. Picked up a hitchhiker on the Trans-Canada Highway near Kenora, Ontario. Said his name was Sam, quiet guy, maybe mid-30s, average height, brown hair, wearing a faded denim jacket and carrying a small backpack. He was polite when he climbed into the cab, thanked me for stopping, said he was heading to Winnipeg. I told him I was going that way anyway, that he was welcome to ride along. He nodded and settled into the passenger seat without saying much else. I am used to quiet passengers. After 18 years as a long-haul trucker, I have learned that some people want to talk and some people just want to disappear into their own thoughts. Sam seemed like the latter. I turned up the radio and focused on the road. My name is Grace Fournier. I am 38 years old. I have been driving trucks across Canada since I was 20, hauling everything from lumber to electronics to frozen food, spending more nights in my cab than in my apartment in Thunder Bay. I love the job. I love the solitude, the endless highway, the way the landscape changes as you cross provincial borders. But after what happened in March of 2021, I am not sure I will ever feel safe on the road again. Entry 2, March 4th. Sam is still with me. We have been driving for nearly 24 hours, stopping only for fuel and food. He pays for his own meals, never asks for money, stays quiet most of the time. But when he does talk, it is strange. He mentioned his sister. Said her name was Emily, that she went missing on this highway in 2015, that he has been looking for her ever since. He described the last time he saw her, standing at a rest stop near the Manitoba border, waving goodbye as she got into a truck with someone she thought would give her a ride home. He said the driver never brought her home. He said her body was never found. I told him I was sorry, that losing someone like that must be unbearable. He looked at me with this odd expression and said, "I will find out what happened to her, one way or another." Entry 3, March 5th. Something is not right. Sam knows too much. Last night we stopped at a truck stop outside Brandon, and while I was fueling up, he started talking about other missing women. He described them in detail. A girl named Tessa who disappeared near Wawa in 2013. A woman named Arlene who vanished outside Thunder Bay in 2014. Another named Patricia, last seen near Dryden in 2016. He knew their names, their ages, what they were wearing, where they were last seen. He talked about them like he had known them personally. But there was something wrong with the way he described their final moments. He talked about fear, about realization, about the moment they understood they were not going to make it home. How could he know that unless he was there? Entry 4, March 6th. I checked the missing persons database at a rest stop this morning while Sam was in the bathroom. I found records for all the women he mentioned. Tessa Harmon, 23, disappeared near Wawa in July 2013. Arlene Baptiste, 31, vanished outside Thunder Bay in October 2014. Patricia Ewan, 27, last seen near Dryden in August 2016. All of them had been hitchhiking. All of them were picked up by someone and never seen again. The cases are unsolved. No suspects were ever arrested. But there was a person of interest mentioned in several of the reports, a man named Sam Holloway, described as white, mid-30s, average build, often seen driving along the Trans-Canada Highway. He was questioned in connection with 4 disappearances between 2013 and 2016, but was never charged due to lack of evidence. He fell off the grid in 2017. No known address, no employment records, no contact with family, just gone. Entry 5, March 7th. I confronted Sam this morning. I asked him if his last name was Holloway. He smiled. He actually smiled. He said, yes, that used to be his name, but it does not matter anymore. I asked him what he meant. He said names are temporary, that he is not who he used to be, that he has moved beyond the person he was before. I told him I knew about the missing women, that I knew the police had questioned him, that I wanted him out of my truck immediately. He did not argue. He just looked at me with that same strange smile and said, "You do not understand yet, but you will." I pulled over at the next gas station and told him to get out. He climbed down from the cab, shouldered his backpack, and walked away without looking back. I watched him disappear into the parking lot, and I felt this overwhelming sense of relief. He was gone. I was safe. Entry 6, March 8th. I drove for 12 hours straight after leaving Sam at that gas station. I wanted to put as much distance between us as possible. I stopped for the night at a motel in Kenora, exhausted and shaken. I called my sister, told her what had happened, told her I thought I had been traveling with a serial killer. She said I should report it to the police, that even if they could not prove anything, they needed to know Sam Holloway was active again. I said I would call them in the morning. I locked the motel room door, checked it 3 times, and finally fell asleep. Entry 7, March 9th. When I went out to my truck this morning, I found something on the passenger seat, a photograph. It showed a woman I did not recognize standing at a rest stop, smiling at the camera. On the back of the photo, written in careful handwriting, were the words, "Emily, June 2015. I felt sick. Sam had been in my truck. He had left this for me. But how? The doors were locked. The windows were intact. There was no sign of forced entry. I checked the security footage from the gas station where I had kicked him out. I watched myself pull away, watched the truck disappear from the frame. But when I asked the attendant if they had seen Sam after I left, they looked confused. They said they had not seen anyone matching his description. They said I had been alone the entire time. Entry 8, March 10th. I cannot explain what is happening. I reviewed the dash cam footage from the past week, the recordings that show the interior of my cab. I wanted proof that Sam had been there, that I was not losing my mind. But when I watched the footage, I was alone. Every single frame showed me sitting in the driver's seat, talking to myself, laughing at jokes no one had told, responding to questions no one had asked. For 7 days, I had been having full conversations with someone who was not there. I looked insane. I sounded insane, and yet I remember him so clearly, his face, his voice, the way he smiled when I confronted him about the missing women. Entry 9, March 11th. I went to the police. I brought the photograph, the dash cam footage, everything. They listened patiently, they took notes. They asked about my mental health, whether I had been under stress, whether I had any history of hallucinations or psychosis. I told them no, that I was fine, that I had been driving trucks for nearly 20 years without incident. They ran tests, blood work, toxicology, carbon monoxide levels in my truck. Everything came back normal. No drugs, no poisoning, no medical explanation for what I experienced. The officer in charge said it was possible I had been suffering from extreme fatigue, that long-haul drivers sometimes experience vivid hallucinations after extended periods without sleep. He said it was more common than people think, that the mind can create entire scenarios that feel completely real. He suggested I take time off, see a therapist, consider whether this job was still safe for me. Entry 10, March 15th. I saw a therapist. She was kind, professional, non-judgmental. She asked me to describe what I remembered about Sam. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said it sounded like a dissociative episode, possibly triggered by isolation and stress. She said the mind is capable of creating elaborate fantasies to cope with loneliness, that I might have invented Sam as a companion during a difficult stretch of highway. She said the photograph could have been something I found or purchased without remembering, that my subconscious could have incorporated it into the delusion. She prescribed medication, recommended regular therapy sessions, and suggested I avoid long-distance driving until I felt more stable. Entry 11, March 20th. I tried to let it go. I tried to accept the rational explanations, to believe that I had experienced some kind of mental breakdown and that Sam had never existed. But then I found the obituary. I was searching online for information about Sam Holloway, trying to convince myself he was real, and I found his death notice. Sam Holloway, 36 years old, died in a single vehicle accident on the Trans-Canada Highway near Thunder Bay in August 2018. Services were held in Kenora. He was buried in the local cemetery. I checked the date. 2018. 2 years before I picked him up. 2 years before he sat in my passenger seat and told me about his missing sister. I had been talking to a dead man. Entry 12, March 25th. I drove to Kenora. I found the cemetery. I found his grave. Samuel Joseph Holloway, 1985 to 2018. Beloved son and brother. The gravestone was real. The dates were real. He had been dead for nearly 3 years when I picked him up on the highway. I stood there for a long time trying to understand. I do not believe in ghosts. I do not believe in the supernatural. I believe in logic and science and explanations that make sense. But I cannot explain this. I cannot explain how I spent a week with someone who had been dead for years, how he knew details about unsolved cases, how he left a photograph in my locked truck. Entry 13, March 30th. I went back to the police. I showed them the obituary, the grave, the evidence that Sam Holloway had died in 2018. They were sympathetic but dismissive. They said I had clearly seen his name in a news article or obituary at some point, that my subconscious had stored that information and used it to construct the hallucination. They said it was a textbook case of confabulation, where the brain fills in gaps with plausible details drawn from memory. They said I needed to accept that I had experienced a psychological episode and move forward with treatment. Entry 14, April 5th. I do not know what to believe anymore. Was Sam real? Was he a ghost? Was he a hallucination created by my exhausted mind? I have no answers, but I know this. The women he talked about were real. They disappeared. They were never found. And somewhere on the Trans-Canada Highway, someone knows what happened to them. Whether that someone is alive or dead, whether they are human or something else, I cannot say. But I will never drive alone on that highway again. I will never pick up hitchhikers. And I will never stop wondering what really happened during those 7 days in March when I traveled across Ontario with a man who had been dead for 3 years. This is my final entry. I am leaving this journal with my sister. If something happens to me, if I disappear the way those other women disappeared, I want someone to know what I experienced. I want someone to ask the questions I cannot answer. And I want someone to remember that the highway is not just a road. It is a place where the boundaries between life and death, between real and unreal, become dangerously thin. Drive carefully. Trust no one. And if someone tells you they are looking for their missing sister, do not let them into your truck. I work in the evidence room for Winnipeg Police Service. It is not a glamorous job. I spend my days cataloging crime scene photographs, logging DNA samples, organizing boxes of evidence from cases both solved and unsolved. Most people who come down here are detectives looking for something specific, lawyers preparing for trial, occasionally journalists with permission to review public records. The room itself is windowless and fluorescent lit, rows of metal shelving stretching back into shadows. Everything labeled and dated and filed according to protocols that have existed longer than I have been alive. My name is Rashid Aboud. I am 34 years old. I have worked here for 7 years. And in October of 2022, I received a package that changed everything. The box arrived on a Tuesday morning. It was sitting on my desk when I came in. No return address, no postage, just my name written in careful black ink across the top. That was unusual. Evidence does not simply appear. It is logged, documented, transported through official channels with chain of custody forms and signatures at every step. But this box had bypassed every protocol, placed directly on my desk as if someone had walked into a secure police facility and left it there without being noticed. I should have reported it immediately. I should have called a supervisor, evacuated the building, treated it as a potential threat. But curiosity got the better of me. I put on gloves, opened the box carefully, and found 14 driver's licenses inside. They were arranged neatly, stacked face up, each one showing a woman's photograph. I recognized none of the names. But when I turned the first license over, I saw a date written in red ink on the back. May 22nd, 2007, I checked the police database. A woman named Jennifer Kwan, 29 years old, had been reported missing in April of 2007. Her body had been found on May 22nd, 2007 in a drainage ditch outside Winnipeg. The date on the license was not when she disappeared. It was when she was found. I checked the second license. Sarah Delaney, 34, reported missing March 2009. The date on the back was April 6, 2009. I checked the database. Her body had been found on April 6, 2009, in a wooded area near St. Norbert. The third license, the fourth, the fifth, every single one followed the same pattern. The dates corresponded either to when bodies were discovered or for victims whose remains had never been found, to when families held memorial services. Whoever had sent this box had attended those funerals. He had watched families grieve. He had been there. I called my supervisor immediately. Within an hour, the evidence room was swarming with detectives, forensic specialists, and officers from major crimes. The box was photographed, fingerprinted, analyzed. The licenses were confirmed as authentic. Matching identification reported stolen or missing in connection with 14 separate disappearances spanning 21 years, from 1998 to 2019. Some of the women had been found dead. Others were still classified as missing persons, but all of them had one thing in common. They had vanished from Winnipeg and surrounding areas. They had disappeared without witnesses, without struggle, without leaving any evidence behind. Until now. A task force was formed. Detectives began reviewing every case, looking for connections. The victims ranged in age from 23 to 41. They came from different neighborhoods, different backgrounds, different walks of life. Some had been students, some had been employed, some had struggled with addiction or homelessness. There was no obvious pattern, no single victim profile that would have helped investigators narrow down suspects. But forensic analysis of the box revealed something crucial: DNA. Not from the victims, but from whoever had handled the licenses. The samples were run through every database available. No matches. Whoever he was, he had never been arrested, never been fingerprinted, never appeared in any system. Then investigators started reviewing surveillance footage from memorial services. It took weeks. Dozens of funerals, hundreds of hours of video, thousands of faces to analyze. But they found him. The same man appeared in the background of 7 different services spanning 14 years. He was always dressed appropriately, always positioned at the edges of the crowd, never drawing attention to himself. He wore different clothes at each service, sometimes glasses, sometimes a hat, but facial recognition software confirmed it was the same person. White male, approximately 35 to 50 years old, average height and build, no distinguishing features. He looked like anyone. He looked like no one. The realization was horrifying. This man had not just killed these women. He had followed their cases afterward. He had monitored when their bodies were found or when their families stopped searching and held memorials. He had attended the services. He had watched mothers and fathers and children cry, had listened to eulogies, had stood among people destroyed by grief, and he had done it for pleasure. He was not just a killer. He was a collector of suffering. The investigation intensified. Detectives canvassed neighborhoods near the memorial services, hoping someone had noticed the man, had spoken to him, had any information that might lead to identification. But no one remembered him. He was invisible, forgettable, the kind of person who blends into crowds without leaving an impression. The DNA evidence was our only tangible lead, and without a match in the system, it was worthless. Then, in December of 2022, a second package arrived. Same black ink, same careful handwriting, same lack of return address. Inside was a 15th driver's license. It belonged to Emily Sanderson, 31 years old, living in Brandon, Manitoba. But Emily Sanderson was not dead. She was not missing. She was alive, going about her normal life, completely unaware that she had become a target. Her license had been stolen 3 weeks earlier from her gym locker while she was working out. She had reported it stolen, received a replacement, and thought nothing more of it. Until police showed up at her door and told her a serial killer had her identification. Emily was placed under immediate protective custody. Police moved her to a secure location, assigned round-the-clock surveillance, and began monitoring anyone who came near her apartment or workplace. The theory was that he was hunting again, that Emily was his next victim, that sending the license was part of his ritual. He wanted us to know. He wanted us to feel helpless. He wanted to prove he could take someone whenever he chose, and there was nothing we could do to stop him. Weeks passed. Emily remained safe but terrified. She could not go back to her normal life, could not return to work, could not see friends or family without constant supervision. The psychological toll was immense. She had done nothing wrong, yet she was living like a prisoner. Her entire existence reduced to hiding and waiting for a man she had never met to make his move. The investigation expanded to Brandon. Detectives reviewed security footage from Emily's gym, her apartment building, her grocery store, anywhere she went regularly. They found him, the same man from the memorial services. He had been following her for weeks, watching her routine, learning her patterns. He had been in the background of footage from the parking lot where she worked, standing near the entrance to her apartment complex, sitting in a coffee shop across from her gym. He was always there, always watching, and no one had noticed. But we had his face now. High-resolution images from multiple angles. Facial recognition was run again, expanded to include international databases. Still nothing. Whoever he was, he had lived his entire life without leaving a digital footprint in law enforcement systems. No arrests, no convictions, no immigration records that matched. He was a ghost. The media became involved. The story was too big to contain. Serial killer stalks Winnipeg woman. Police release photo of suspect. Emily's identity was kept confidential, but the man's face was plastered across every news outlet in Canada. Someone had to recognize him. Someone had to know who he was. Tips poured in, hundreds of them. Detectives followed every lead, interviewed dozens of people who claimed to recognize the man, but none of it went anywhere. He looked too average, too generic. People saw their co-workers, their neighbors, their relatives in that face, but none of them were him. As of today, November 2025, he has not been identified. He has not made contact again. Emily remains in protective custody, living under an assumed name in an undisclosed location, unable to reclaim her life. The 14 families whose loved ones were taken by this man still do not have justice, and somewhere, possibly still in Winnipeg, possibly in another city, possibly watching another woman and planning his next move, the man we call the Collector is free. I think about him every day. I think about the care with which he arranged those licenses in the box, the precision of the dates written on the back, the arrogance of sending them directly to a police evidence room as if he was untouchable. I think about the fact that he attended funerals, that he stood among grieving families and felt nothing, or perhaps felt satisfaction, felt power in knowing he had caused that pain and would never be caught. I think about Emily, about the fear she lives with every day, about the fact that her only crime was existing in the wrong place at the wrong time and catching the attention of a predator who decided she would be next. And I think about the women who are no longer here, whose lives were stolen, whose families still do not have answers, who deserve justice that may never come. The Collector is still out there. He has access to women's personal information. He knows how to stalk without being noticed. He knows how to kill without leaving evidence. And he wants us to know he can do it again whenever he chooses. We have his face. We have his DNA. We have proof of his existence. But we do not have his name, and without that, we cannot stop him. If you recognize the man in the photos released by Winnipeg police, if you have any information about these cases, if you have seen someone who matches his description behaving suspiciously, please contact authorities immediately. Do not approach him. Do not engage. He is dangerous, calculated, and has been evading law enforcement for more than 2 decades. 14 women have already died. Emily Sanderson may be next unless he is found. And after Emily, there will be another and another, because men like this do not stop. They do not feel remorse. They do not change. They only continue until they are caught or until they die. I work in an evidence room. I catalog horrors for a living. but I have never encountered anything as chilling as those 14 licenses arranged in a box, each one representing a life stolen, a family destroyed, a killer who walks freely among us and feels no fear because he knows we cannot find him. He is watching, he is waiting, and he will strike again.